And by the way, I have been following.
That voice you're listening to is the voice of Gabriel McCaffrey, who is in Ottawa, in Canada, soon to become the 51st state of the United States, as everyone knows. Uh, he's kindly joined us today, and Pat, as usual, is holding the fort from the shadows of Donegal, but still there. How are we all
Yep.
today? Is the weather good in Canada? Are you expecting a storm, Gabriel?
Well, at this time of year, there's always storms, but right now the biggest problem is the intense cold. It's generally below -20 every night, so lots of fun.
But that's a
Uh,
great thing about Canada. You don't know what the temperature is outside in terms of you're sitting around in t-shirts and stuff indoors. Look at that! Look at that! Oh, we can only dream of that kind of thing.
uh,
Anyway,
yeah, but Jude, hey, hold on, Jude, McCaffrey, away with this. We're expecting a hurricane. Apparently now it's been upgraded to a hurricane. It's not great.
Yeah,
it's
but you're
supposed to be the
okay.
worst ever for Ireland.
It stops at the border, so it won't do you any harm.
I know. And the sort of this blue skies of Ulster for the great grey skies of the Republic.
Did you
It's
see
very
the
sick.
map? Did you? The map of Ireland was red, and then
I
the
read it.
north was carved out and it was orange. So clearly, the hurricane stops at the border and
Nothing's ever
becomes a
changed
storm.
there. But I vaguely remember I was a wee boy about seven when Debbie hit, and my dad he worked for the electricity supply board, and I don't think we saw him for about a week. He was out all day, all night, doing repairs. But I remember that slates were coming off roofs, and
Oh
people
yeah.
were warned not to go outside and stuff.
I heard somebody on the radio today talking about it and saying if you were driving along a motorway at about, say, 70 miles an hour, that if a slate or something had this wind behind them, the slate would be passing you out and leaving you in its wake or going through your
Uh,
head, as the case may be.
Going through your head more likely,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Okay, let's address ourselves to matters of state. You think that what was happening in Dublin yesterday, Pat, and today in the Dáil, was important or just a wee squabble?
Jude, I think what happened yesterday was an unbelievable. Last night I watched the RT, and there's what do you call the guy? I can't. He's a red-haired guy. From the Irish, Finan Sheehan. No,
Yeah, yeah.
that's the guy. And normally he will bash Sinn Féin from early morning to late at night and anything else he can think on. But last night I thought, for the first time I heard him, he was having a real go at the government. He basically said this was stroke politics, and everybody knew it was stroke politics, etc., etc., etc. And Jude, I, I thought to myself, these some of the hypocrisy of the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael guys, and Micheál Martin and Harris sitting outside at the plinth at the Dáil, trying to say was a subversion of the Constitution. I actually felt like throwing something at them. And the dishonesty, the hypocrisy, the double standards was off the scale. These are
What?
the guys who tried to pull stone. Dude, it's the first time in history. Michael Lowry, by the way, I have big question mark whether he should be on the Dáil or not. Let's ignore that. He led a group of I think it's six independents for the program of government. They agreed the program of government, including, by the way, a deal for a member of theirs, Verona Murphy, to become the Can Corda. The Dáil didn't vote it; they agreed beforehand. So here's this Can Corda sitting up on the plinth or in the seat, the throne of the Dáil, and she's saying X, Y, and Z. But the bottom line is, it's the first time in the history of Irish politics since a free state where the Irish state was formed that members of government also wanted to be and members of the opposition.
Well, you
And
see,
they're
they have it.
trying to tell us all, what was it George Orwell says? They try to make you believe that the evidence of your own eyes is not no relative, it's not uh, realistic.
But
They
you
were
see, they
trying
have
to
the
say that
power
we
of
should be members
bilocation,
of the
Pat.
government and members of the Dáil, or members of the opposition. That's unbelievable.
They have the power of bilocation. I thought it was rather good. Micheál Martin saying, this was terribly. This was a defiance of the Constitution
Nutrition,
because they
yes,
hadn't
yes,
voted him in as Taoiseach.
yeah.
How does all this sound to you, Gabriel, from a distance? Does it sound like petty squabbling or does it sound like matters of state?
No, it's extremely important in a parliamentary type assembly that there are clear understandings of the roles and differences between the government and the opposition. in Ireland's unique circumstance because of the collapse of the combined vote of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, so that they're now on equal level in vote share terms with Sinn Féin. They
Yeah,
required a group of independents to support them in order to achieve government and appoint Taoiseach, etc.
Mm.
They made a very underhand deal with one of the most disreputable people in Irish politics, who probably, as Pat said, should not be in the Parliament. He is an affront to the Irish Parliament. But anyway, that agreement was that opposition MPs would, or TDs, sorry, would help elect the government, and they duly prepared to do so. But then they wish to retain the privileges and processes that are available to them as opposition. This just defies rationale, defies logic, and I think it's possibly unconstitutional as well. So it was not theatrics, it is actually the opposition and the leadership of the opposition trying to maintain the rights of the people of Ireland, the voters of Ireland, to challenge and question their government. I don't think that's a trivial matter whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, I must say, I was very pleased at the extent, well, maybe it's just the rebel in me, but I was pleased at the extent to which Sinn Féin and Labour and the others really stuck at it and said, we're not putting up with this. And Verona Murphy, is it Murphy her name is? Verona
yeah,
Murphy?
Verona Murphy. Yeah, yeah.
She didn't come out of it looking very well. She reminded me of a teacher that lost control of a class, and she had to, um, abandon the session twice. But you were saying that a deal had been done, and I'm sure a deal had been done for her to become Cancura, because that's no
Yeah,
small cheese. She
not at
doesn't
all.
have to be elected in 5 years' time. She gets
Yeah,
a special salary
it's
for
her
being
salary
Cancura.
something. She's set for life. It's basically, I think the salary somewhere around 280,000 a year. So for the next 5 years, she's got 288,000. And even if she's not elected at Cancun in the next government, she doesn't have to stand for election at the next election. Her seat is because whatever, whatever. But not only Richard, the outrage or the full outrage of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael people, I found it very hard to take. I genuinely did. I thought, you people have tried to pull a stunt. Like, Jude, I made reference to the RT. Fianna and Sheehan, there was a guy who used to be an advisor, I think, to Fianna Fáil, and there was a lady from an academic, and all three were basically saying this is a big issue. This is
Mhm.
it's got to do with democracy, it's got to do with the constitution, and I heard Alan Kelly, from the former leader of the Labour Party, was on today. He said if we had let this go, it would have been enshrined ever more amen that he could be both in the government and in the opposition, Jude,
Yeah.
which is totally ridiculous.
Well, you see, apart from what they would say, I think that was the point that Mary Lou and others were making, that it was eating into the time that they would be
Yeah,
given to the opposition to criticize the government. These guys could get up and talk for 10 minutes and really say nothing, and thus protect the government from the opposition's wrath.
yeah,
But
yeah.
incidentally, I read somewhere, Pat, you can correct me if you know different. I read somewhere that the government, or the proposed government, isn't it's illegal to do deals with individual people. Now, I know that this goes back to Tony Gregory and so on.
Yeah,
I gather that for the government to do a deal with an individual and say, we'll build a bridge in your constituency, we'll build a road in yours, or we'll have a new town hall or whatever, that's illegal. If that's the case, I can't believe that they get away with this sort of stuff.
well, Jude, if it's illegal, there's been a hell of a lot of illegality. Jude, there's a place down in Donegal called Fanet.
Hmm.
About 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they built what they call the Harry Blaney Bridge.
Hmm.
Spent 22 million on it. About three sheep and about three goats go over it every day, and that's about it. And I think I'm joking. I'm not. On the way into Letterkenny, and I keep repeating this. Gabriel doesn't. I don't know when Gabriel was last in Letterkenny, but I was coming out of Letterkenny today, and I would say and it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and there was two lanes of traffic a mile back trying to get into the town, and there's no. There should be a bridge there. Hasn't been built. Now, could you explain to me the philosophy or the priority list where they built a bridge and that connects Downings and Fanet where nobody uses it. It's a great white elephant, and then they didn't build one in Letterkenny. And I'll tell you the reason they built it to do a deal with Harry Blaney to support the government back in about 1990, or something.
I think that's what that springs from people being the number of independents that are appearing.
Yeah,
I think they really are a sort of a threat to democracy because they're in it
yeah.
clearly for their own patch, and there's
The
nothing wrong with
constituency
that.
deals, Jude.
There's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that, except that you're
yeah,
ignoring everybody else. You know,
yeah.
you're elected to look after the people of Ireland, not just the people that are elected you. And
Mm.
how they can get away with that kind of thing. And the government has given them these, well, apparently has given them these assurances in advance. And they
Yeah,
certainly have given Verona Murphy one hell of an assurance. And she must be a very
yeah,
happy woman, despite her experience yesterday. Gabriel,
yeah.
do you have this kind of thing happening in the Canadian Parliament? Do you have independents? Do you have people adhering to party lines? Or incidentally, sorry, Gabriel, I want to say that Gabriel's from, you're from Derry, aren't you, Gabriel, originally?
Belfast.
Can you hear me?
Well, you've gone off
Hi.
voice.
Can't, can you hear us, Gabriel? Nod your head if you can. No, you
No,
can't hear us.
no. I think, by the way, I'll answer for Gabriel. As far as I know, Gabriel's originally from Belfast,
Oh, Belfast,
and
right? Yeah.
I lived
Uh-huh.
in Ottawa for quite a few years. Been
Uh-huh.
involved in a lot of Irish community over there. But anyway,
Mm.
Jude, know what the funny thing or the odd thing about it is the fact that it stopped Taoiseach yesterday getting elected and stopped ministers being so on. But for the first time in years, uh, it was a united opposition. Gabriel, can
Ah.
you hear us?
Can you hear us,
No, I
Gabriel?
think
I'll
no.
write
Gabriel's gone
something.
off.
You can keep talking, Pat, and I'll write a note
Yeah.
to him. Um,
No, no, Jude, I think there was all that sort of stuff yesterday, and I heard several people saying it was disgrace to our national parliament, and it was a disgrace, and it held us up to ridicule in the eyes of the world, and so on. And the opposition, were and I thought, wait a minute, this is something we should be sort of supporting 100%, you know.
hmm.
So I don't know how much further we can push this one, but I
I,
mean, I
I
suppose
don't know,
today
Pat.
they're
You don't think it's overblown? Like it was pretty hot
slightly
and heavy
overblown,
at the time, but it really, it's
but
all
Jude,
sorted.
I think the opposition had to make a stand, and what I liked about it was the unanimity.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely,
I hope that encourages them that they know that when they stand together, they achieve something.
yeah. But
Because in
Jude,
fact, the government
there might be
had to
a
agree to
precedent
it.
there. Yeah, there might be a
But
precedent there.
is there? Have they put a
Gabriel,
time
can you
limit
hear
on it,
us?
Pat? Have they put a time
What's
limit
that?
on it? Have they put a time limit on
No,
the?
but they said they're going to set up a committee forthwith to have a look at all this, and they're
Mm.
going to try and sort it out.
Well, in the meantime, let's hope that they don't try to pull a fast one again once they get
Yeah.
the doll running. Okay, let's maybe move. Uh, uh, you can't hear us, Gabriel?
Gabriel's
Can't hear us?
indicating that he has to leave because I think he's lost contact with us.
Okay, okay. Let's move to Trump and his inauguration. Did you watch it? You said you weren't going to watch it, Pat.
No, and I didn't, Jude.
Well, I watched bits of it, and I couldn't. I was torn between amusement and disgust, and sort of hardly believe what was happening. Like after he'd given his inauguration speech, he had another much longer speech to a bunch of his followers, including
Yeah.
Musk and company. And he signed a lot of these, whatever they are, presidential documents. And then he threw the,
They're called executive orders, Jude.
that's it, yeah. And he threw the pens then into the crowd, as somebody said, like a footballer throwing their jersey. Now,
Yeah.
I was wondering to what extent I find it very off-putting because it's not the way that we are used to seeing politicians act. But actually, if you think about it, it's no big deal. I mean, if he throws the pens to people, so what? If he signs executive orders, those have to be these can be challenged. They aren't into law as he would lead you to believe immediately.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's maybe we're exaggerating too much because of the manner of his handling of the presidency. I think
Yeah.
maybe we're thinking, oh God, this guy's going to destroy everything. Do you think, Pat?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Jude. I remember there's a famous bit of video of Saddam Hussein sitting in a room, sort of sitting smoking a cigar when they're taking people out to execute them, and so on. There's shades of that. This was serious politics, serious issue as entertainment. This was red meat for his followers, and we're going to uh, tell the WHO to basically fuck off. That's really what he said. We're going to Mexico. We're going to introduce tariffs to Canada and Mexico at 25%.
And withdrawing from the Paris Agreement.
Withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. And everybody's unfair to the states, and I'm the guy that's going to sort this all out, Jude. It reminds me of that sort of idea of the Sun reader. Let's put tits on page 357 to have 10 pages of football, and by the way, see, we put in about 5 pages of absolute bigotry and in regard to the loony left. This is what all the rest, and this. The morons, and I'm calling them morons, Jude, because there is no way anybody. I've seen people on social media try to say that he's holding traditional values. This man's a racist. He's a narcissist. He has done more things enough. He should even the bishop, the female bishop, who said calling for compassion and mercy. He's called her a leftist to whatever. So in other words,
hard left and nasty. He said it was very nasty and it was very poor service.
Nasty, aye. But Jude, if you read the Beatitudes and says, I was hungry and you fed me, I was in prison and you came visit. That's the whole cornerstone of the Christian faith.
But you see, that's
evidence where's the evidence that Trump buys any of us, and yet he's the upholder of traditional values.
Yeah, and I mean, he played big in terms of Christianity. I remember the one of them last time around holding the Bible. I think he was holding it upside down.
Upside down, yeah.
But he said, you see, I heard guys talking about this on a podcast, and he said that God had preserved him in that assassination attempt. He came so near to it, God saved him. I was tempted to ask, I wonder what was God thinking about when he allowed the guy to fire so close to him. If you say it's God that saved him, then it must have been God that put him in danger as well. But that notion of manifest destiny, I am the chosen one. Therefore, you can't, there's nobody to replace me. I am going to bring things that nobody else could bring. I am the savior. That's kind of loony talk. I mean, he clearly seems to believe it. He really does seem to believe it.
But the thing, that's so obvious. How does a man who has paid out for having sex with a porn star, who's been engaged in activities with other porn stars, who has committed adultery at least 3 times, who says he grabs women by the pussy, who has admitted that when he was running the Miss World or Miss Universe or whatever, that he used to get into the dressing room deliberately where young girls, were in the naked or nude or semi-nude, and that he used to do it deliberately. This is the same guy. Oh, and by the way, he's been done on a civil court for the rape of A. Jean Carroll. Now, this is the guy who goes up and says, God has sent me. I'm selling Bibles. And all these people and by the way, you go on to social media, this is the man for us. He's bringing back old traditional values. Going, are you people insane? Just I really can't get my head around that.
Well, you see, I wouldn't be too hard on him in terms of his sexual life or his private life. No, it's not private, it's public. Everybody knows about it. Because I've never believed that, most presidents are very pure people. I mean, most of them are leechers, from what I can gather. LBJ, Jack Kennedy, you can go down the list. But the question is, how does that impact on their performance as politicians? And you're right, I think, to say, if that's the way he acts in private, and then he says, God has chosen me to lead the country and saved me in this assassination attempt, then that's like the Tories saying family values and then doing nothing of the kind themselves. Incidentally,
hypocrisy.
I wonder, is he doing that to get us? I mean, is he doing things like that and signing these documents in public and throwing the pens out? Is that distraction politics? Because
I don't know what it is.
It's attention. He's an attention seeker.
Yeah, but Jude, it's populism. These are serious issues, Jude. No, uh, he's talking about making Canada the 51st
Yes,
state of
pretty.
the. You're right.
Yeah,
He's
I was
talking about
hoping to get
taking over the
Gabriel to
Panama
talk about
Canal.
that.
The Panama Canal. He's talking about taking over Greenland. Jude, those are the implications of that. He's also talking about introducing tariffs for the EU. Now, Jude, all those things could either the world is getting increasingly destabilized. How much, these are serious issues, but he's standing, like this, and in front of 20,000 supporters, like, here's me acting like the strong man, signing these, get those blacks out, get those Mexicans out, those are, what he's called them, the African countries, shithole countries. Jude, it's the whole performative thing of saying everybody else is nobody. We're the master
Ah.
race, and it's that whole thing. And by the way, he's a couple of things he said as well, Jude, that no, that he was going to introduce tariffs because to the EU because there's such a trade imbalance. Jude, I would love to know if does he consider General Motors not American? Does he consider Ford not American? If he starts introducing tariffs on European cars, I would suggest that the EU introduce tariffs against the Ford company, the General Motors, and all the other American companies.
Well, one of the things that I like about him, to be honest with you, is I feel safer almost with him than I did with Biden. Biden was
Jesus,
funneling
Jude, come on, no,
armaments.
stop me
Wait
there,
a
stop
minute
me
now.
there.
Wait a
Go on and
minute. Wait
tell
a
me,
minute.
explain that to
Wait a
me.
minute. Yeah, he's funneled armaments for the last year to Israel, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Not maybe hundreds of thousands, but thousands certainly of
Thousands, yeah.
innocent people. Uh, One of the things that Trump has claimed is that he's going to put an end to the war in the Ukraine and better relations and so on. And I have a feeling that it might in the long run be bad, but I get the feeling at least in the short term he will do some sort of deal with Zelensky and with Putin. And that makes me,
Right, start.
I'm glad to see that
Gabriel,
because
Gabriel, can
there's
you
a
hear
lot of
us?
loss of life going on there, and we're not being
Yeah.
told about it.
But Jude, here's the other thing. Somebody said Biden about Israel. I have zero doubt that Trump would have been much, much worse about Israel. He's already indicated that no matter what's happened, that he will support Israel come hell and high water. In
Oh, well,
fact,
that's
he
true,
wants
yeah.
them to drop 2,000-pound bombs again. He wants them to do a whole host of things. He said that if the Israeli hostages weren't released, there'd be all hell to pay by the Gazans and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
So, and he has do you remember the famous day that they moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to
Yeah, that's
Jerusalem?
Jerusalem,
Like
yeah.
that was a turkey shoot. They shot over 1,000 people, and about
Mm,
400 of them dead. And the American
mm,
media didn't even bother repeating or reporting
mm.
it.
Well,
Gabriel, were you hearing
you
this,
have to take
Gabriel?
into account, Pat, the fact
No.
that the war, not the war, the slaughter in Gaza stopped almost exactly when he came into office. Now, that could be coincidence, it could be God knows what, but I'm glad to see that that has happened. If his coming
Yeah.
into office influenced that, then I'm glad that that was the case. See, I think there's a danger we throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's so much filthy bathwater around Trump that you tend to say every damn thing he does is wrong. It might be he does some good things. One second, Pat. Gabriel, can you hear us now?
I can. Can you hear
Good,
me?
good man. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. That's good. We're talking about Trump, and we're agreeing that he's a lecher and he's a narcissist, and but he's a bit crazy. That's the truth. And he says things that nobody else says. Uh, and one of the things that caught my ear was the fact that he said he has got his eye on Canada. It would make a very good 51st state. How has that gone down in Canada?
Well, he repeated similar comments within the last 60 minutes at the Davos meeting, the World Economic Forum. He did not join in person. He broadcast from Washington on a Zoom link, and I hope he had better Zoom link than I've been enjoying today. But anyway, uh, yes, he's repeated this nonsense about Canada becoming a 51st state. Despite the fact that Canada is much, much larger than the entire United States, despite the fact that Canada, if it were to be a state, uh, would probably end up being several states, each with two senators, and the majority of whom would be Democrat. So I think it's part of the usual Trump capacity to sow chaos, confusion, and stupidity. It's not going to happen, but I think it's much more part of his opening shots in a negotiation to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he actually renegotiated last time he was in the presidency, and it became the Canada, US, and Mexico Free Trade Agreement. Now, despite the fact that it was he and his personnel who negotiated that, he's now actually unilaterally uh, uh, refusing to comply with the very terms in which he negotiated. So we know what we're dealing with. We Irish have lots of experience with the British negotiating agreements that they then do not put into effect. In Canada, your question, how do Canadians feel? The Canadians I've spoken to over the last few weeks are horrified and disgusted, and they consider Trump personally to be a clown, a blowhard, but they also recognize that behind Trump there is actually some very complex and sophisticated and very wealthy individuals who actually have economic plans for the changed relationship between Canada and the US. The other thing that Canadians are very good about is that our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, called a meeting of all the premiers, which he described as Team Canada, and all the premiers are in alignment with the Trudeau government, except for Danielle Smith from Alberta. Alberta has always been, if you like, the difficult child in Canada because they have oil, cattle, very little else, and they see the world and they see the economic relationship with the USA very differently from the rest of Canada. But it's, I think, very significant that even in someone like Doug Ford, who's the Premier of Ontario, the biggest province, the biggest populated province, and the most economically important province in Canada. I live in Ontario. Ottawa is both the federal capital and a city within Ontario. Doug Ford, who's a conservative and who is by no means any friend of the Liberals in Canada, has stood shoulder to shoulder with Trudeau and the other premiers to say that if America imposes under Trump tariffs unilaterally on Canada, we have within our own capacity tariffs that can be imposed in response. So, for instance, much of the oil, a good portion of the oil, and much of the gas, and a significant amount of the electricity, we call it hydro here, but over 30% of the hydro that's shifted to the US all comes out of Canada. And Canada has significant tools at its disposal to retaliate. I think we're going into a bumpy time before it settles down.
I'm surprised that Canadians weren't more outraged. I remember, as you know, I was in Canada for a time, and in fact, I taught in Alberta as well as Winnipeg and in Manitoba. And the thing that struck me among the students as a greenhorn, they really detested the bloody Yanks. You know, they really had a prejudice against them. So the very idea that he would say, we'll make you the 51st state and you'll be really glad, I would have thought that would really have outraged people. I mean, I would have seen them as frothing at the mouth. I'll tell you, if he said that Ireland was going to become the 51st state, I would be furious. I really would. What do you think, Pat?
Unfortunately, Jude, you'd probably get enough arselicks in Ireland to say, "Oh, we'd love to be the 51st state." That's the only problem I can see with that. I would be outraged, absolutely, but that's not the point. Jude, I was listening to what Gabriel was saying there. You know, I think the EU, and I've heard several people saying that if Trump tries this with the EU, they're going to introduce tariffs. The Chinese, they're talking about what, 35% tariffs. You know, the Chinese are going to say, well, it's a retaliatory thing. So, you know, how smart is all this? And as Gabriel says, is this a negotiating tactic? Well, I don't think it's a particularly smart negotiating tactic because already I think he's got a hell of a lot of people's backs up.
Well, you know, I think the south of Ireland is very vulnerable. And I think we've talked about this before because
Yeah.
the south is very dependent on people like Apple and Google and so on. If he introduces taxes means that it would pay them better to shift more of
Yeah.
their personnel to the States, then they'll do that. And if they do that en masse, the south of Ireland's economy is going to tank. It's going
Yeah,
to
the only thing I
tank.
heard the IDA chief on the last day, and he says some of the American companies have literally spent billions in Ireland knows, greenfield sites, developing things, developing programs, they're embedded almost in the state. To move to the States now would cost them, unbelievable but amounts of money. The other thing, Jude, they have to stay in Ireland to get into the EU, which is the biggest market in the world, 500 million people. So it's not as simple as Trump's making out.
There's also, of course, the fact that when people are embedded, they spend a lot of time and effort embedding
Yeah,
themselves in the south of
yeah,
Ireland. You just don't pack your bags and clear off without an awful lot of rupture and expense and God knows
yeah,
what. Now,
exactly.
I don't say that means that they will definitely not move, or some of them might move, but I think it'll be more difficult than some people would believe. Gabriel,
Yeah.
you're about to have a general election in your country, let us to say in Canada, aren't you? Or you threw out poor old Trudeau. I remember his father when I was there. He was a grand chap. Everybody thought he was very sexy, although he was a middle-aged balding man. Um, why have they kicked out or lost the love of Justin Trudeau?
Justin Trudeau. Yeah.
I've met Justin Trudeau several times, including most recently at an Irish event in Parliament Hill. I have a lot of time and respect for Justin Trudeau. I met him the morning after his first election when he came to Ottawa. Um, and he was very popular and he has charisma. But like any politician that's been in office for 9 years, sometimes the burnished exterior rubs off a bit, and some of his complexities of governing have exposed realities. And for example, some of the things in which his government and some of his ministers have been involved in have been, frankly, corrupt or less than satisfactory.
Sounds a wee
That,
bit like Micheál Martin.
oh, very much. But beyond that, he's also been, and this is something that Ireland does not have, he also has had a very antagonistic media for the duration of his prime ministership. The major organs here in the print media, the Globe, the Toronto Star, the National Post, television, CTV and CBC, he has been very, very critical of him. And add that to his political opponents, the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre, have had an unrelenting, very well-funded campaign of distortion, lies, and antagonism towards him. And I think he had reached the point where he realized he couldn't lead his party into the next election. Now, he does have a 5-year right to a mandate. So he's resigned at this time, and there are now candidates have emerged to take over the leadership. You talked about the election. We do not know an election date yet. We know the date of the leadership contest, which is March the 9th. So far, there have been 4 candidates declared their interest. Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada and then Bank of England governor, is by far the clear leader and favourite to win the leadership of the party. Chrystia Freeland, who kicked off this whole recent situation for Trudeau by resigning, was the deputy prime minister. So when your deputy prime minister resigns and slams the door behind her on the way out, it's very hard for the prime minister to survive. There are a couple of other candidates. One of them is my local MP, Chandra Arya, from an Indian background, but actually very supportive of Irish unity. I've had some good conversations with him. But anyway, all the candidates have to have $50,000 in by the beginning of next week, and then $350,000 shortly thereafter. So then all members of the party who are registered can vote. So all you have to do is fill in a form online that you're not a member of another federal party, and you can become a registered member. You don't even have to pay a membership fee. Then the vote is taken. This is important because it affects the likely outcome. We have about 360, 380 ridings in Canada. We call constituencies ridings. I'm in the riding of Nepean, which is part of Ottawa. Each riding has a vote where all the registered members vote, and then each riding gets a 100 votes into the overall vote. So
who's your money on? Who's your money on, Gabriel?
My money's on Mark Carney, no doubt about that. Chrystia Freeland probably shot herself in the foot in being so antagonistic to her prime minister when she resigned. I think Mark Carney also has a.
He's an international reputation. I remember when he was over here.
He has a background and a reputation and a strong understanding of economics. And I didn't catch all your discussion about Trump, but I can suggest to you that given the difficulties Canada faces ahead with Trump's chaos and antagonistic remarks about Canada, Pierre Poilievre, who looked like he was certain to win the next general election in Canada, he had established a 26-point lead over the Liberals. That has now collapsed below 20%, and it's going in the wrong direction for Poilievre because Mark Carney, who has not yet adjudicated the leader of the Liberal Party, seems to be the person that Canadians think might be able to stand up to Trump.
Yeah, I get that feeling. He's a cool, and he comes across as very urbane and a man who has a bit of intelligence. It'll certainly be a contrast to Trump. We've only about a minute or two left, Gabriel. Very quickly, how long have you been living in Canada?
36 years this year.
Do you ever pine after being back in Belfast or Ireland?
I like to go home and visit friends and family. I was last there 2 years ago. I was actually in Pat's part of the world. I was in Donegal in Ardra. I was visiting friends in a distillery there, the Slieve League. And and I have friends in Ardra who I visited. I have my parents buried in Berra, County Tyrone, which is just outside Omagh.
I know it well.
And so I always go there when I go home. And I have sisters in Belfast, in West Belfast, Andersonstown, Turf Lodge. And yeah, I like to go and visit. But the thing is, after 36 years, you have children born here in Canada, you have grandchildren. Your roots are actually now different. I love Ireland. I love my country. I keep an interest in it and what's happening socially, culturally, politically. But my home is Canada.
Yeah. Do you ever regret having made that dramatic move from one country to another?
Well, I did my first move in '77, and I moved to Dublin, and I was in Dublin for 11 years.
Oh, that's Ireland.
And then everybody I knew in Dublin was emigrating to Canada, Australia, or somewhere. So I got the bug. No, I don't regret it. I've had a very good life in Canada. I think I've had a very fortunate career-wise and lifestyle-wise. So I don't regret it. Do I miss Ireland? Of course I do. I miss our own unique culture and its accessibility. And I miss the crack.
You can't have everything. You can't have everything, Gabriel.
When I say I miss the crack, I mean the fun.
Yeah. Okay. Our time is just up, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Pat.
All the best. Despite our technical difficulties,
I'm going to try to save this one.
And I apologize for the technical difficulties.
No problem. Good to see you.
No problem. Catch you later.
Bye.